Chapter 1. A War Throughout the Bloodline. The war is on. I am Adora Hopley. Before I tell you my own life story, I must talk about my mother's journey. It seems to me there's been a war throughout my bloodline. On the women's side, there has been an assignment to destroy us physically, emotionally, spiritually, and in other aspects of life. My mother, myself, and my daughter all survived some sort of near-death experience in our young lives. Coincidence? Maybe, but I'll let you draw your own conclusions. My mother, Ella, was born in 1947 in Romania. She was the only girl in her family, the baby sister. Her two brothers were entrusted with babysitting her now and then, while their mother did chores around the house. One day, when she was just over a year old, her brothers looked out for her in their father's shop. During play, the boys set her on their father's tall work table. She would throw things down from there, and the brothers retrieved them. That was a fun little game for a while, but then she decided to bend over and look as one brother picked up whatever she dropped. She leaned, fell off the table, hit a metal bar, and tragically fractured her spine. 3 of her lumbar vertebrae fractured in the fall, and she became paralyzed from the waist down. Little Ella became the little cripple. She had to wear a body cast for 5 years. Much of her time was spent alone in her bed. She would watch longingly from her window as her brothers, her cousins, and their friends played together in the yard. Ella was in and out of the hospital to get her casts changed as she outgrew them. She described her experience. Every cast change was a horror for me. They put me on my tummy on an operating table, put a lot of padding on me, and applied plaster all over. I had to lie in that position until the cast hardened. Mama cried more than I did. After the cast dried, my mother took me home on the train. She had to walk 7 kilometers, 4.3 miles, from the train station to our home, carrying me in her arms. When I was 4 years old, my left leg became infected with tuberculosis and swelled up badly. Mama took me out of the cast and kept me on a grain-filled sack that molded to my body and kept it in alignment. The doctors from the hospital were pleased with her idea, and it was more comfortable than the cast. Since antibiotic treatment for TB was not available in Romania in 1950, Ella was sent home from the hospital for the time being. The doctors from the Cluj hospital told Ella's mother they would have to amputate her left leg. Here's how my mom remembered it. One day, Mom put me in a specially designed bathtub filled with medicinal herbal tea for my daily bath. The skin cracked, the water became white like milk, and the bone that looked partially disintegrated came out in small pieces. One of the doctors from the hospital came to our home, collected the bone pieces for a lab study, and told my mom to take me back to the hospital for amputation. She did, and a few days later the infection moved to my right leg, which swelled up, cracked open, and the bone drained out like the left one. While I was at the hospital, the infection took over my whole body. I stopped eating and drinking and went into a coma. The doctor decided not to amputate. I was expected to die, so I was sent home. My parents heard that antibiotics for TB were available in the United States. They tried desperately to contact someone who could order some, but their attempts failed. A doctor from another village claimed he had gotten a shipment of antibiotics and said that he could come weekly to give me an antibiotic injection. My parents sold their cow and all they could sell to pay this doctor. They tried to help me, but they didn't know at the time that it wasn't antibiotics the good doctor was injecting. When it appeared that Ella would die despite all the efforts, her dad came home from the School of Theology in Bucharest, bought her a coffin and a burial dress, and they started to make preparations for her funeral. They thought she would die and would be buried before he had to go back and take his finals for the semester. 2 weeks later, little Ella was still hanging on to life by a tiny thread. It was hard to tell she was still breathing. Her mom would put a feather under her nose to see if there was any air movement. Her father finally decided he would go back to Bucharest, take his finals, and then come back to bury her. After about a month of going without food or fluids, when her mother thought Ella was about to die, she cried out to God in desperation. She had been reading Charles Spurgeon's sermons, which were mailed to her house monthly. She read how Jesus healed the sick, and she read testimonies of how God healed people still. She read a quote from Mark 7:25, where a woman asked Jesus to heal her daughter. She started to cry, pointing to that passage in the magazine, and prayed, "Lord, I am worse than a dog, but you healed that woman's daughter. You can heal my daughter too. Have mercy on me." She could not bear to see her baby die. To her surprise and joy, instead of slipping away into eternity, Ella opened her eyes and asked for plums. She would not have the ones her mother had put in jars for the winter. She wanted fresh plums from the plum trees. It was winter time, and snow covered the ground and the trees. A lady from church heard of the dilemma and hurried home to search around her tree to see if she could find any plums left under the leaves. She returned quickly with some wrinkled, frozen plums. She cleaned them the best she could and brought them to little Ella. "This is all I could find," she said. Ella took a couple of bites, then she settled for the preserves. She started eating and drinking and getting stronger. Soon she noticed she could even feel and move her toes. This was a real miracle, as she had been a paraplegic for years. No one ever dreamed she would ever walk again. Ella went back to the hospital for treatment and rehabilitation, and everyone was amazed at her miraculous recovery. The hospital staff asked her mother many questions about what she did and how this turn of events came about. She told them everything. She told them how she cried out to God, and she told them about the doctor that came weekly to give her shots after she was sent home from the hospital to die. Mama happened to find a vial while she was cleaning house and gave it to the visiting nurse who came to check on Ella's progress after she was released from the hospital. It was one of the medication vials the doctor had forgotten to discard. The vial had some leftover fluid in it, and the nurse decided to take it back to the hospital for testing. The tests showed the vial had no antibiotics in it at all. Ella had been given intramuscular vitamins. The doctor was investigated, arrested, and they never saw him again. They never got their money back either, but they had their little girl, and they were ever so grateful. It took some time, but the bones eventually grew back in her legs and hips, though she still had some impressive scars. My mother recalled, "It took a long time for the bones to grow back, from 1952 to 1954. First soft cartilage grew, then it hardened and became normal bone. Those 2 years were so lonely, no one let their kids visit me for fear of infection. My cousins came, but they were not allowed to come in the house. They played outside, and I watched them out the window. I cried as I watched them run and play. My brothers played with me, but I wanted to play with kids my age. Sometimes they snuck in to see me. That made me feel better. It was a hard, emotional time for me." Ella was not well enough to go to school in first grade. The teacher would come to their house after school hours to teach her and give her homework. Ella would do the schoolwork with the help of her mother and brothers. In second grade, she was carried to school by her brothers or her parents. The brothers came to detest this chore. They would sit her down at her desk at school and come to pick her up after school. She enjoyed learning, but was often ridiculed by the other kids. Her parents would encourage her at home, would pray with her, and would teach her how to cope. My mom still remembered being called the little crippled girl, and how she felt so bad and often cried, but she pushed through. Little by little, Ella gained more and more strength, and at age 9, she started to walk. While she never got strong enough to run, she was able to lead a fairly normal life after that. At least it appeared that way to those around her. While she was crippled and unable to walk, she spent much of her time reading, drawing, writing, and studying. She enjoyed learning and pursued academics with excellence. When she finished high school, she was accepted into the nursing school in the city where she completed a degree. She eventually got married, and besides becoming a mother of 5, she also became quite accomplished in her career and worked as a surgical nurse for 20 years before our family moved to the United States in 1985. I still remember watching a surgery through the little window in the nurse's room. Mom was squeezing the oxygen bag to give the patient artificial respirations while the doctor was taking out the gallbladder and dissecting a part of the liver. After the surgery, my mother brought the tray and showed me the organs, blood, and all. That was one of my first introductions to the surgical field. Chapter 2. a daughter's near-death experience. At the beginning of this chapter, I said I noticed a trend in my family line. So, before I describe my near-death experience in the next chapter, I want to share my daughter's experience when she was almost a year old. In 2015, just as the school year started for the boys, my little girl ended up needing aggressive medical intervention after she ingested tiki torch fuel from an open bottle that was left behind the massive floor lamp in our living room. I had left her in the living room briefly so I could get her bottle ready in the kitchen. When I came back, Zaina was waddling toward me, coughing and breathing heavily. She had an expression of disgust on her face and her eyes were watering. I noticed the open bottle behind her right away and instinctively knew I had to call 911. The medics responded quickly, placed her on oxygen, and drove her to the hospital. I followed in my car. When they got to the emergency room, Zaina's breathing was becoming more and more difficult as her airway swelled. The doctor placed a tube down her throat to keep her airway open. She was sedated immediately through an IV that had to be drilled into her leg bone. "This is the fastest way we can get access to deliver medications right now," the doctor explained. I knew that, but it was so hard to see that procedure being done on my own little girl. The doctor then decided the staff at Children's Hospital in Seattle was better prepared to take care of Zaina, and she was transferred within the hour. I followed the ambulance again. I spent the next 24 hours beside the hospital crib where my little girl was lying, hooked up to monitors and IVs. I held her hands, wishing I could cuddle her and hold her close. Thankfully, by the next evening, the swelling subsided, and the doctors were able to take the tube out of her throat. I was allowed to hold her again, and Zaina clung to me for the next week, day and night. I felt such relief being able to hold her in my arms. Zaina developed a touch of pneumonia after that, and she had to stay in the hospital for antibiotic treatments until she was able to start taking food and fluids again. A week later, she finally recovered, and we were able to come home. I'm so grateful for family and friends who prayed and sent warm wishes and stuffed animals, cleaned our house, and helped care for our boys while Zaina recovered in the hospital. Oh, and I shouldn't forget about the teachers at school and the neighbors that helped bring our newly acquired cat, Lola, back home every time she ventured into the streets or followed the kids to school. Though my family has experienced this trend, I believe God is giving me and my descendants tools to help prevent its perpetuation. I am grateful to look back and see the goodness of God in healing and restoring us through all the troubles. My mom also felt that her sufferings were not in vain, and was happy to share and encourage others to believe that miracles still happen. She wrote, "One day I was feeling down and having a pity party. I started to complain to God about my condition, about the pain and suffering I've experienced all my life, about the physical scars all over my body, and the emotional scars too. When I was done complaining, I felt like Jesus spoke to me, saying, 'You have scars? I do too. Your scars were not your fault, it's true. My scars were not my fault either, but man's sin caused them, including yours. You are embarrassed and ashamed of your scars, but those scars are proof that by my wounds you are healed. I gave your life back to you when the casket was made ready for you, and after a new shroud was made for your burial. I am Jesus, and I am not ashamed of my scars. Your scars are blessed too, showing my love for you. You can help others that are wounded to heal. Many people do not believe in miracles, but you can prove it by your scars. I promised Jesus that I would use my scars to help others, and I wouldn't complain about them anymore." Chapter 3. Too Young to Die. Now that I have described a bit about my mother and my baby girl, I want to share about how I died and came back to life. In 1970, when I was only 3 months old, I became very ill. I had a high fever, difficulty breathing, and later started having convulsions. My father had not yet seen me. He had been drafted by the Romanian army and was stationed far away. My father asked his superiors to release him for a home visit, but the Romanian army denied his request. My mother took me to the village clinic. The doctor was not at the clinic that day, but the nurse saw me and got me started on antibiotics and sent me home. That night, after doing the best she could to get the fever down and help me to sleep, Mom fell asleep herself. We were staying with Mom's parents at the time. Mom woke up in the middle of the night and found me blue, pulseless, and breathless. She started CPR and tried to resuscitate me again and again, but there was no response. She would lay me down on the bed to check for a pulse and listen for any signs of breathing. Then she would pick me up and start CPR again. She kept trying, and when she did not get any results, she started crying and screaming hysterically. My grandparents, who were sleeping in the next room, woke up hearing my mother's wailing. Grandpa Papo knelt down by the bed, lay his hand on me, and started to pray something like, "Dear God, you know how much we love Adora. Please give her back to us so we can enjoy her and see her grow. We are asking this in the name of Jesus. Amen." After a few seconds, my mother tells me I started to sneeze, and after a few sneezes, my breathing returned, my color returned, and I was revived. My mother estimated that I was clinically dead for at least 20 minutes, though she said it felt more like an hour. She was overjoyed with my recovery. However, Papo was gripped by a terrifying thought. An eerie feeling came over him, like there was some kind of evil presence in the room. He said to my mother and grandmother, "What have I done? What if God wanted her to go, to protect her from some terrible thing she would have to endure here on earth?" Grandpa knelt again and started praying. "Please forgive me, Lord, if I made a mistake in asking to bring Adora back, if you wanted to keep her from some terrible thing." Then he flipped through the pages of the Bible, and his eyes landed on a passage from Luke 22:31-32. "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail, and when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers." After my grandfather read that passage, he was relieved and experienced a sense of peace and calm right away. The next day, my mother took me to the doctor's office in the village. The nurse reported that she saw me for fever and respiratory distress the day before at the clinic. But when the doctor examined me, he said in amazement, "This baby was never sick." I am glad God brought me back to life then, but as I have experienced some really dark times over the years, there have been many times I wished I had died that day. I could not figure out why God let me live, knowing full well the things that would happen to me that would lead to times of inexpressible despair. Yet at the same time, the fact that God did bring me back to life when I was a baby gave me a glimmer of hope to hold on to in the darkest days of my life. Somehow, I kept thinking that maybe God would make a way, even though it seemed like that was an impossibility at the time. Chapter 4. Early in Life. I was born and grew up in Zalău, a neat little town in Romania. It's located in the northwestern region of Transylvania, about an hour's drive from Cluj. I am my parents' second child in a family of 5. I was strong-willed and stubborn. I got into trouble pretty regularly. If I wasn't fighting with my brother and my sister, I would fight with the kids in kindergarten. In my grade school years, I remember starting each new school year with new goals of being good and having good grades. I loved the smell of my new leather backpack and the fancy new pencil boxes my mom procured. But as the year progressed, I would always find some way to get into trouble and bring shame upon myself. Amen. Thanks for watching and sharing with your friends, family, and loved ones. To be continued in the next part. Shalom.